everyone for joining. Welcome to another episode of Spekit Sauces, where we discuss and share the secret sauces to empower your team, leading today's digital transformation, sales enablement, operations, and learning. So today I'm really excited because we're going to be talking with Dan Darcy, the SVP of Sales and Partner Enablement at Salesforce, to really dig into his view on enablement, how it's changed over the last few years, and talk a little bit about what the future holds, especially in this remote environment. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. This session is going to be recorded, so don't worry about taking notes. We'll spend the last 10 minutes addressing some of the questions you have during registration, but feel free to connect with myself or Dan afterwards on LinkedIn, Twitter to ask any follow-ups as well. The chat is also going to be monitored, so feel free to drop in any additional questions that come up as we go into the content. So our goal here today is going to be strategies, tactics, content. We promise no slides, so hopefully you leave with a lot of good takeaways. So before I introduce Dan, just a little bit of background on myself. I'm the CEO of Spekit. Spekit is a digital learning tool designed to drive productivity by surfacing key enablement and tool training and playbooks directly within the tools like Salesforce that your team uses every day. And my background is in business operations. I used to manage Salesforce and a lot of other key technologies, and also running enablement. But without further ado, I'm really excited here to introduce a good friend, Dan Darcy. He has over 13 years of experience leading product marketing and sales enablement at Salesforce, and before that led global sales operations programs at small little companies like Oracle. So without further ado, Dan, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, thanks, Mel, and good evening, good afternoon, everyone from smoky California, actually here in San Francisco. Yeah, so I've been at Salesforce for 13 years, and the last 5 years or so plus have been running the enablement team. So it's been awesome.
Awesome. And so let's talk a little bit about enablement. So I know you come from a product marketing background. Like, when you talk about enablement at Salesforce, like, what do you think of? Describe your version of enablement.
Yeah, I mean, great question, because enablement is a lot of things to a lot of different people. It can range anywhere from the communication side to enablement, which is really the awareness to the deep technical or product expertise that you have. But really, when I think about it, I try to just segment enablement into three basic buckets. You know, you have your foundational learning, you have your continuous learning, and then something I like to call, and I know we've been talking about it, is what I call just-in-time learning. So back in the day, when you think about enablement, foundational learning was like, let's get an onboarding program. You know, obviously onboarding is more than just a set time of, like, you know, the first week or two of your job, but it's really more of that, what is that foundation? And then once they get past the foundational learning, what is that continuous learning that you drive? And then what's that learning that happens just in time? And so that's how I really describe it in just really simplistic fashion, is thinking about, you know, the entire employee learning life cycle at Salesforce. Yeah.
Awesome. And so what was it like scaling enablement at a company the size of Salesforce? And from when you joined, obviously it's grown a lot. Like, talk to us a little bit about how enablement just shaped up to what it is today at Salesforce.
Yeah, I mean, quite an adventure. I mean, it's been an incredible ride. I mean, the pace, just think about it. The pace of innovation, especially in just the technology industry in general, is pretty staggering. Not only that, the growth at Salesforce we were doubling in sales reps every year. And then, not to mention, everyone also has their opinion of how they want to enable folks. So getting everyone aligned around that, it was pretty much quite an adventure. But overall, I would say it's an incredible experience because of the people that that are part of the enablement team. I mean, it's just, we have a world-class enablement team at Salesforce, and just when you think about it, enablement is the convergence of all of this information really coming to the employee or the sales rep that has to then communicate that to the customer. And so that challenge then becomes, like, how do you package up in a way that is consumable, and thinking about it for all of our customer facing employees. And so, I don't know, when I think about it, it's been quite a whirlwind ride, but it's been such a fun one at that too. Yeah.
Love it. And it sounds like you recently took over partner enablement as well, which I can imagine brings on a whole new set of challenges since they're not actually your employees. They're actually channel partners, SIs, ISVs that are looking to, co-sell, resell, et cetera, Salesforce.
Exactly. And drive that deep product expertise. And what's fun about that, and for the enablement folks who are on the call, they're two different types of learners. When you think about your internal sales employees, I'm sure there are a lot of people who love the learning, but sometimes they're a little unmotivated with learning. It's like learning is a requirement that they have to do. But when you look at our ecosystem, they're very motivated because they're just super, want to get all in on the product expertise. How do I become more like Salesforce, et cetera? And so it's definitely a change, and a welcome change as well. That it's fun.
You actually just said something that I think is a challenge that a lot of enablement leaders face, which is just, one, like when you hear the word learning or training, like the natural kind of reaction that we often get is a little bit of like an eye roll, or like, oh, again, I need to get off that sales floor. Or when like, hey guys, we've got this new change that's coming out. Like, again, like as humans, like we naturally resist change. And so from a cultural standpoint, like what are some things that you feel like Salesforce has done really good to kind of like create a culture of learning where you are met with excitement as much as possible versus that kind of natural reaction that we have?
Well, I would say a huge major breakthrough was Trailhead. And I know, a lot of people have heard about Trailhead, and we created this trailblazer, community of people who have have forged their own career path by learning Salesforce. And that's what I think is the beauty of Trailhead, is that it's sort of smaller modules of learning and snippets of learning that you can, build on over time to really get you to where you want to be. And so, Trailhead has been that leading aspect for us at Salesforce in really driving that foundational learning. When we were talking about the 3 pillars that I was calling out earlier, Trailhead has been just that for everyone. And I'm sure you've met a lot of folks. I mean, everyone on this call, I'm sure, are trailblazers as well, and have badges under their belts. So, I mean, that has really been bred into everything that we do within Salesforce. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. I mean, to me, Trailhead generally will be just such an interesting case study to go back to, because I feel like it really did just transform learning, with engaging, your customer or potential customer base, but then also just like how you guys have turned it into my Trailhead and internally, and really brought to light this whole concept of gamification. Right. Yes. Which again, like, how do we know that people, tend to resist the idea of having to go through a course. How can we make it fun? How can we add badges, make it more of a competition, and play to some of those other kind of psychological factors that are needed in people? And I feel like Trailhead is clearly just like frontline winner in terms of having created that culture around learning where, people compete with badges, and like it's become a really, big part of the culture around learning.
I mean, gone are the days of these hard, large courses. I mean, we have to think about it in smaller snippets and especially as our attention spans, grow thin more and more, and it's just always constantly. But if you look at the mountain of stuff that you have to learn, it's really unmotivating. But if you take it one thing at a time along that path, it makes it so much easier. And to your point, gamified. I mean, it's been really a breakthrough for us. And that's where I would say a key to the success that I have in terms of my tech stack, my Trailhead is one of them, in driving that foundational knowledge. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah. Actually, just last night I was doing a little bit more research. Like, one of the things I'm really passionate, and one of the gaps that I see in some cases with emergent enablement leaders is just the lack of like real learning background, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of really understanding like the science of the brain in adult learners, right? And like some of the tips and tricks you can incorporate in your enablement strategy to drive that retention, right? To drive that reinforcement, like chunking and alliteration, things like that. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how technology plays a role in helping enablement leaders kind of incorporate the basics, fundamental principles and science behind learning in some of these more modern approaches that we take, like micro-learning, right? And that your short-term memory can only retain 7 pieces of information at once, right?
I love that point, because that's one of the very first things that I noticed when I joined Enablement 5 years ago was I thought I knew everything, but then when I went into this world, I'm like, oh my gosh. So I needed to really build a team around me that, to your point, has the science of learning behind them to really build that out. Because I mean, I came from product marketing, so I love positioning, telling a story and the narratives that are out there. But when it comes to that, you can't do that all the time. There really has to be, that sort of learning design. And so that's where I really invested a lot in the learning design aspect with that. And to your point, technology is now embedding more of that learning design into the technology that we have. And so it's been, and that's what is going to be a breakthrough for a lot of enablement leaders when they don't have the resources to hire a learning design, team. They can really see that embedded into the technologies that are out there. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I love it. Well, on the same topic, so if you think about just kind of learning and training organizations, like I think for a long time, training budgets were hard to come across, right? And a lot of studies show that training budgets are increasing by employee level, right? Companies are starting to realize that that becomes your competitive advantage, which is like, how do you build, if you lose that key employee, it's not, oh shoot, I lost those skills, because skills you can retrain on. It's that fundamental knowing, that understanding that comes from experience and repetition that is really hard to replicate, right? And so talk to me a little bit about, or actually for those people that are listening here that are struggling to get budget as an enablement leader.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how to get buy-in from the rest of your company, how to make the pitch for enablement within your organization.
Well, I will just say, first of all, I completely empathize because, you think, oh, Salesforce has this war chest of money. Even at Salesforce, we have to really fight for the budget and the right resources. And so, when I meet an enablement person out in the field, there's a knowing look that we all give each other, that we're like a battle-tested soul, if you think, that has that daunting challenge of enabling all their employees with like 2 people and a nickel, And so, I recognize how thankless a lot of that is at times, because when enablement's great, no one is going, oh my God, great. I mean, when the revenue is great, everyone's not going, great job enablement, but when the revenue is not that great, everyone's like, oh my God, they're not enabled, right? And so it's just one of those things that I just want to, it's almost a therapy session for me saying that out loud for everyone, because I'm with you. But there are 3 pieces of advice I would really think about sharing with all of you folks. First, I would, it's really around getting aligned with the leadership on what success looks like. And this is a really tough job, because it comes to the thing around it's not only just measuring the completion of enablement, have they gone through the program, it's really aligning around the KPIs of what you're trying to drive that's out there during the programs that you're achieving. And so when you understand that the sales leadership understands that, you need to just make sure that you continue to come back to that and say, these are the KPIs, look at the success that we're driving. If only we could do more, right? And drive that. Second, I would say, is the multiplier effect. The folks that go through your enablement program are going to be future leaders within the organization, and they are going to be the ones also owning sometimes the budget. So make sure that your enablement program has the most incredible experience, quality content, and almost think of it as like a net promoter score, where would that person recommend that enablement to someone else? Because again, like I was saying, that is really key into that multiplier effect. And that is just more of a longer game play, because that at some point in their careers, they will progress, and that will, help drive. And then the third thing I would say is communication. You got to communicate and also listen far, wide, and as often as you can to all the leadership, to make sure, and the stakeholders that you're driving, to make sure that they have the mind share that the enablement is effective and that things are happening. And fourth, actually, now I lied, there's 4, is just to really ask for the business. Don't be afraid, and keep chipping away. And I would say be persistent with asking for the business and trying to really drive your bigger vision. And don't give up. I mean, that's one of the key factors.
Love it. And I love the point that you said on number 2, which is like thinking of a net promoter score in terms of judging your enablement. And I think like when it comes to getting budget, right, especially in this remote environment where now all these new hires, if you're fortunate enough to be in an industry that's doing, well, or even somehow being accelerated by the environment we're in right now, hiring is going to continue, right? Yep. Whether that's tomorrow, whether that's in 3 months, 6 months, like you should be planning around when that's going to resume for your organization. And so I think enablement and the impression that people have of your enablement ultimately becomes a key to both attracting employees and retaining employees.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? Because, I was talking on the last episode with the CEO of Northmark, who was talking about how they were struggling to attract some top key employees because of their lack of technology, because their competitors had them. And that was their big really impetus for going forward and like investing in Salesforce and a ton of other technologies in their stack. And I think, learning enablement is very soon going to become a much more just deliberate competitive advantage for companies, which is like, hey, join our organization. Like, we're going to help you be successful. Here's how it's going to work. Because at the end of the day, like, the best employees are often hired through referrals, right? And so you want every single person on that team to be a champion of your organization, of your sales program, you name it. And a big piece of that comes to like, am I enabled to be successful? Like, am I confident that if I recommend that my colleague or my ex-colleague comes over, they're going to hit their quotas because they're going to know quickly and effectively how to produce revenue.
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing that came up while you were just chatting as I was actually thinking, for the folks on the line, you obviously don't have massive amount of resources, so you can't do everything. And what I would do is scope down what you're going to do and do it really well with the resources you have. And then that's it. If your leadership wants more out of you, they need to invest more, because that it's really it's hard. It's impossible to do it. And I've seen it where I've worked with a lot of enablement folks in just mentoring across the industry. When they're really spread thin, they're doing everything not as great, whereas it might as well just do one thing really, really great. So,
and so on that note, if you had an extra 3 hours per day as an enablement leader, right? All of us are busy, all of us wish we had more time in the day. If you did magically have 3 more hours in your day, how would you spend it? Maximize impact for your
I mean, I would break that 3 hours into an hour per each thing. So for me, again, as I've said before, aligning with stakeholders and really getting out there and listening. How is this going? Can you share a few things? Getting their advice, because we need to make everyone across the company. Enablement is not just a team's job; it's everyone's job across the company. And the more you align with the stakeholders, and the more you bring enablement as a culture into the stakeholders that you're working with, the better you're going to succeed. So I think aligning with stakeholders is one of the key things. For me, then it's also to the net promoter score we were talking about earlier, spending more time with the team and ensuring that the quality of the content and the experience is pretty awesome. And then my third hour, again, would just be looking at the data and really thinking about where we can improve. I mean, but that goes along the lines of spending more time with the team as well. So.
Love it. And then if you think about like the best programs you guys have ever run with enablement, or if you look at your sales teams at Salesforce right now, or generally, like what are the 3 key areas? If you could focus 100% of your time on just 3 key areas with sales teams from a coaching standpoint, what would those be?
3 things I would say is empathy, positioning, and relevancy. So we think about this a lot. How do you empathize by helping the sales folks understand the buyer persona? What are the things that keep them up at night? What are their issues? How do we really truly understand the buyer? That's one. So empathy. Positioning, and this is really around the product understanding and the capabilities, and how do you position it to those buyers once you understand and empathize with them. And then the third piece is relevancy, is what I was saying. It's obviously, what are the relevant conversations that are happening with them? I mean, it could be things that are happening in the world, what's happening with just their industry, what's happening within their company, based on the news that's happening. All of that relevancy is the last, but it's really one of the key important things. How do you stay relevant with our customers? So
love that. One of the areas, and I'm still deciding like how to build enablement around this, but I think, and there's a lot of books and again, information that kind of reinforces this, but I think one of the best traits of leaders is being able to recognize patterns, right? And then really quickly be able to pivot, the direction of a conversation based on those patterns, right? And part of it might be emotional intelligence, but it's really being able to like, oh wait, I've seen other deals like this and here's how this worked. And so I think that's where I've observed, at least in our team, when our VP of sales or myself are involved in the conversation, like just the ability to connect those dots comes a lot easier to us than to our AEs. And I think it's just a question again of training enablement. So that's just something that's top of mind for me right now. And again, don't know the best way to word it, but just really thinking about like, how can we help steer them and help them build those strategies to then connect those dots and start, knowing the conversation.
I love that. And I think that's where the empathy, the empathy, the positioning and relevancy conversation thing comes in, is really thinking about it through a framework, which you're spot on. And then how do you get them to recognize that pattern and then move on the key play or strategy they have to drive. Yeah, that's awesome.
Love it. Well, great. So so we've talked about, building enablement at Salesforce. We've talked about just, how to get budget and stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the shifts you've seen in enablement. So you talked about the 3 pillars, right? Onboarding, continuous, and just in time. Like, how has your view of enablement really changed or evolved, especially as the world's getting more digital? And, what advice do you have for people that are, building their 2021 enablement strategies, looking at, how are they going to promote and enable their teams remote? What should they be thinking about?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because, when I first joined Enablement 5 years ago, it was a very heavy in-person intensive experience, where it was all about, we need to get in front of people and we need to be in person, and how highly caloric that is in terms of the effort and the work that goes into it. So scale was always been a number one value of mine, and thinking about how do we scale the business through technology and through that. And, I thought, that, there were a lot of differing opinions. Like, everyone's like, no, true learning really happens in person and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, we can debate that, but like, boom, the pandemic has really then accelerated this move to the digital virtual world, and now everyone has to do it, right? And so, and in my mind, I was like, not yes to the pandemic, but like yes to the validation of the feeling that was trying to drive the scale, right? And I've just always thought about that virtual needs to happen and be online, and trying to move things into the tech world. And so, when you think about the enablement space, there's just you were talking about this earlier. There's just so much information out there. It's impossible for everyone to expect everyone to know everything. There's just incredible amounts of information. So, for the foundational learning, how do you get them dangerous enough, to be virtual and do that and get up and running and drive that productivity? Then it's like, how do you, for the continuous learning, how do you keep them on top of what's relevant in the market and with our customers and the plays that are being driven there? And so, we have our, systems that we drive, stand and deliver, where we call it stand and deliver internally, where we make the reps do a mock scenario, mock customer call around a particular scenario. And then there's all this other information, which I call just in time. And I feel like we have not cracked the code on that. But what I love, and I'm not trying to push Spekit so much, but what I love about Spekit is that how all of that just-in-time learning is very contextual, right at the point of what you need, and really it can help you drive you through the process. When you think about all of a sudden, we called it swivel chair enablement way back in the day, because, right, and now no one can really swivel in their chairs. But when you needed an answer to a question, you would just swivel chair and basically ask your colleague, your neighbor, whoever, or, in our personal world, we just go to Google, right? And it's right there, right in time. But I think, as we think about this, like, how do we bring more of that contextual information right at the point of need? And that is one of the biggest things that I think, is cracking the code on that just-in-time enablement, to really help our reps be more productive. And I feel like Spekit, you guys have a really, that's why I'm here. I think you guys have a really great way of thinking about how that just-in-time learning happens.
Thank you. The reason I have such a big smile on my face is I'm just laughing at what Elle is probably thinking. She's our director of marketing that planned these 2 sessions. And the last guest I had also made the swivel chair analogy. And he was like, our team now refers to Spekit as a swivel chair because, what you used to be able to go over, now you just hover over to Spekit, which is just fine. Well,
maybe that's your new logo. Your new logo. There you go. Swivel chair.
For your digital workplace. Yeah, we'll have to do some sort of a mashup. Yeah, absolutely. And so speaking a little bit about technology, so, as teams are transitioning to remote and, just the enablement landscape has just evolved so much. I mean, you've got like content management systems, like the HighSpot, the Seismics of the world. You've got conversational intelligence, which I am the biggest fan of. You've got knowledge bases, you've got learning management systems, you've got more kind of modern just-in-time solutions like Spekit. Like, how can enablement leaders kind of make sense of all these different tools and how they play together? Like, how do you think about choosing the technologies for your stack?
Yeah, I think about what is going to move the needle the most, and think about the different use cases you have. When I was talking about foundational learning, a lot of that is my Trailhead for us, right? And like, how do we get them to go through this learning path and journey? Also within that foundational learning, there's a need for a content repository of information, and that's where we have the the HighSpot we have of the world. And then you think about the continuous learning. How do you keep everyone, up to date? Where, like I was saying, it's hard for people to sit down and take a course. It's better if you just apply that learning right away. So we do a lot of that stand and deliver is what I was talking about. It's a key factor. And we have, level jump for that. And then the just-in-time is really where we need to go next, and really figure out how do we automate that just-in-time knowledge right at the point of need. And so, I mean, that's why there's, vendors like yourself that are pretty incredible in driving that. But again, for me, it's all about just the use cases, especially since when we were talking about earlier, we don't have that much budget. So how do we figure out, what are those top use cases and go after that?
Awesome. And speaking of that, so let's talk about measuring impact, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that, frankly, vendors in this space, as well as enablement leaders and even executives, have alike, which is like, we all know that employees want training, right? There's a misconception that they don't want training. They want training. There's, again, a ton of research. We actually did a study with John Barrows that showed that 86% of the people that responded, the number one feedback they had is they wanted more coaching and wanted more training, right? So we know that the sales teams are asking for it. We know anecdotally, that training works, but how do we measure impact? Like, how can you actually tie, hey, this course or this time I spent coaching our reps led to this? Like, how have you gone about kind of measuring ROI, impact, et cetera, in the past?
Yeah, this is like the holy grail. You ready for a long answer here? Okay, well, when we talk about frameworks and we think about this, first we need to define what a great account executive looks like. So we come up with what we'll call a competency framework. And in those competency frameworks, they have, what soft skills do they have? What product knowledge do they have? What industry knowledge do they have in speak the language of the customer? And then what, operational knowledge they have within the internal Salesforce, how to get the deal done, et cetera. So if you think about those competencies in that competency framework, they're all tied to business outcomes, because this is where we have to align on that framework with the sales leadership. When people are like, I just want everyone to talk to the C-level executive here. Well, talking to the C-level requires all of these skills and competencies to get to that C-level conversation. So if you say that the talking to the C-level is a business outcome, what are the competencies that go underneath that topic, if you will, or that business outcome? And then those competencies and that business outcome then will have KPIs that are measured within Salesforce to get to that. Obviously, it comes down to call activities or scheduling the meetings or this or that. And we start trying to draw KPIs to tie to the business outcome as well as the competencies. And that's then how we figure out where we can measure that certain aspect. Right. So then think of it as Lego pieces, right? Then you have the business outcome Lego piece that then builds into a stage, whatever stage of your deal process. And it's that much of a science that we think about that. And I know that's a lot of analytical things and thinking through that. But at the end of the day, it's really there's no right answer. There's a lot of different answers of how people go about it. But that's just how we think about it at Salesforce, is really trying to formulaically get it down to a science so that it's very operational, so that we can say that we did this training. This training was tied to these 3 business outcomes, And because it's tied to these 3 business outcomes, we can measure then these KPIs to say if this training actually worked.
Absolutely. You're speaking my language. I mean, that's definitely what I'm kind of excited about as I think about our future as, technology. And one of the biggest gaps I see just in traditional kind of learning methodologies, whether that's delivered over a webinar, you name it, it's just how can I tie, or like, what do I know works? Where should I be spending my time for maybe content creation, right? Because that's one of the biggest, I think, constraints that we have, which is time to create valuable content. Yeah. What kind of content is going to be high impact? Like, how can I get visibility around, hey, our SDRs, like, wow, we onboarded a new class. This couple, these 2 SDRs are absolutely crushing it in their number of meetings. What is the content that's most influencing that behavior, right? Are they spending more time understanding our, cold card scripts, our messaging, our positioning, our competitors? Like, how can we tie that content back to outcomes? And so I think really this next wave of technology and just generally where learning is going is going to much more deeply embed that analytical side of things, which I think there's been a little bit of a gap there other than just, did they pass an assessment or not? And actually looking at like, okay, what does the data show in the system of record and tying that back to the actual learning and content that's delivered.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about this, that's where it gets really tough for all of us enablement folks out there, is that sales leaders have, every sales leader has a different interpretation of what happened in the last quarter and what they want to fix. And so it's getting aligned around that framework to really then go after that. And I think your point around measuring content and where people are spending their time is all spot on. It's great.
Great. So now we're going a little bit over the 30-minute mark. So I just want to make sure that we answer a couple questions that just came in during the session. One of them was around sales and technical enablement. Can you talk a little bit about, those 2 different kinds of enablement and the best methods to approach?
So I try to break it out into, it's a process in terms of sales and technical enablement. So 101 is really just the awareness around it. 201 is more around the positioning and the understanding of the high level product capabilities. And then the 301 is really that more technical, I would say more sales engineer type content. And that's how we think about it. It's almost a life cycle of a new product introduction. When we think about a new product gets launched, we have a lot of awareness, FAQ, getting it out there. What are the things that you just need to know to be dangerous enough to talk to our customers about it? Then 201 is that more deeper learning aspect for sales teams. And then 3 is the SE content. And then 4, which is what I'm working on now, the 401 is more the implementation coding aspect of that, and just think about it as that life cycle of the sales and the technical enablement space.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we've seen work really well just as a tactical piece is if anyone's using conversational intelligence tools, right, like the Exec Visions, Chorus, Gongs of the world, those tend to be really good technical enablement. We basically convert our demos, we convert our, I'll record different use cases and show the features in the tool and then create playlists for our sales teams to go through as well, because that's where, I've struggled as well, is just, it's not just the technical enablement of like, how does this work, but more so what stories do I bring in and like, what are the benefits I want to communicate and what is the story I want to tell around this particular feature and how it aligns and provides the business value that the customer's looking for.
Yeah, I would say in more of the technical enablement space, that's where the hands-on challenges are the most important in really trying to understand the actual true product capabilities of the coding and the implementation side. With the sales enablement stuff, it's more, can you actually talk about it and really sell it and position it properly? So that's where the mock scenarios of what we call our standing delivers really happen. And then the really the more technical enablement is what we're really trying to crack that code on. I mean, we have our Salesforce sandboxes, our developer orgs where people can actually use Salesforce and play around, and that's their own, hands-on challenge, a sandbox that they can play in. But, as we acquire more companies, it's becoming more challenging because not every company has a sandbox. So how do we create those mock demo environments that are out there to really make that happen? And that you're spot on with what you just said. So
yeah, one of the things we've created is basically one playlist by use case. We happen to use Chorus for the different kinds of demos or personas that we're catering to. And then also different demo flows where instead of linking to the 1 hour demo video or whatever that they can go watch, instead we just link to snippets like, hey, for the end user portion of the demo show, let's say we've got 5 key features or functionalities we want to highlight. We actually will just embed a little snippet there so that the AE before the demo can go back and just watch that, 2-minute, 3-minute snippet, right? Going back to the concept of micro-learning, just like also understanding AEs just don't have a whole lot of time in their day to go back and rewatch demos, even if they want to perform their craft. Breaking that down, making it really easy for them to access a couple of those snippets that talk about that 1 or 2 minute piece can be really valuable as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. What else? What else from the teams, the people out
so
there?
We've got a ton, and I want to be respectful of time here, so let's just jump into 1 or 2 more. So you talked a little bit about culture, but one of the questions was, how do you embed culture and tone of voice into enablement content?
Yeah, this is extremely important at Salesforce. It's one of those things where our own learning designers and writers go through their own culture and tone and training. And then it goes through a lot of iterations to remove words that may be divisive or culturally insensitive or biased in any way. And that's sort of what the secret sauce for us, and I wanted to use that sauce term because I know the Spekit. And that's the secret sauce for us in terms of really how we think about the content that goes in to our enablement. It's quality content is of extreme importance because, obviously garbage in, garbage out. But we have a contract as enablement professionals with the people that we're helping learn, with our learners. Basically, if they're really devoting the time to learning, we really want that to be the most incredible experience, that they learn and they leave and they learn something that day. And that's something that every writer and learning designer at our team does. And we even have this thing called verified course designer internally that we built, which is a big program for our learning people, the people who are just building content into our My Trailhead. They can't touch the keyboard until of putting content in the system until they go through that training and pass it. So
love it. Yeah, I think that's super important. Also, going back to the value of in-person training, like I agree with you. I think at the end of the day, we're moving to this very digital workplace with or without remote, where employees spend most of their times in all these different apps and tools and stuff. So digital training is the future. But I think what you just reinforced, like the cultural piece and like the coaching, like that's why sales kickoffs, right, and things like that, that motivational factor, like we've started doing quarterly kickoffs, and granted we're doing virtual, but it's just to get people excited. It's a different way for our product team to highlight new features, right, and to hear them talk about them. And so I think that's where blending different learning strategies, right, from like that kind of like in person, we're going to showcase, drive motivation, to the, hey, I want to sit down and take a course, to I'm in the moment, I need help. Like enablement leaders should really be thinking about all those different prongs around like how to cultivate the different elements of what is going to engage employees.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. This was super fun. We went over time, but people hung around, so hopefully it was good content. And for everyone that joined, again, we did record the session, so we'll make sure to send it to you if you want to listen to it again. And we do have another episode coming up in September. This is our Boots on the Ground series of Spekit Sauces. So this is really to talk to the enablement professionals that are actually building out content. So it's going to be tips and tricks on like how to actually design that content. A lot of what Dan and I talked about today. And it's going to be with Anne Renee Thrash from JLL, Fortune 500 brokerage firm. They use Salesforce, and she creates all of the training around Salesforce and sales process that their teams use every day. So look out for an email around that. Thank you so much for listening. And Dan, thanks again for joining.
Thank you for having me. All right. See you guys.
Awesome. Bye-bye.